You know, I don't believe this, but I want to believe, is a great attitude, actually, and I think if you're not too serious about it, we can all allow ourselves little and emotional support unsubstantiated hypothesis as a treat. On that note, today for Dinovember, I want to talk about this little jerk. So in 1942, this dinosaur skull turned up in Montana. It was given the specimen number CMNH7541, and it has been causing problems ever since. So here's what everybody agrees on. Everybody agrees this is the skull of some kind of tyrannosaur, and it would have been about 5 meters long when it died. Beyond that, everything goes off the rails. The identity of this skull flip-flopped for decades between it's a juvenile Gorgosaurus and it's a juvenile Tyrannosaurus, but then, in 1988, paleo legend and professional dinosaur iconoclast Robert Bakker published something saying, no, this was an adult when it died, it's a completely different kind of tyrannosaur, and I'm calling it Nanotyrannus. When this animal was alive, it would have been not just smaller than T-Rex, but proportioned pretty differently too. It would have been skinnier and more lightly built, and it probably would have had a proportionally much smaller head. But unfortunately, in the context of Tyrannosaur evolution, that doesn't really help answer the Nanotyrannus question, because for most of the existence of the tyrannosaurs as a group of dinosaurs, they were not only way smaller than the late Cretaceous giants, T-Rex and its closest relatives, but they were also kind of proportioned like that. They were skinnier, they were more lightly built, they had smaller heads, and so if one of those primitive tyrannosaur lineages had hung on in Montana into the very late Cretaceous, Nanotyrannus is kind of what we would expect it to look like. On the other hand, the giant late Cretaceous tyrannosaurs with their big heads and their stocky bodies also were proportioned more like this when they were babies. Despite Tyrannosaurus being a super well-studied dinosaur, we don't have that many examples of fossilized animals that died during T-Rex's awkward puberty stage, which happened between the ages of 12 to 16, by the way, so exact same timeline as human puberty, which I think is fun. Anyway, one of the few concessions that the anti-Nanotyrannus people will usually make to the pro-Nanotyrannus people is, yeah, we don't quite have enough specimens to, prove that this skull fits into the growth progression of Tyrannosaurus growing up. Bone that is growing deposits these cross-sectional lines, kind of like tree rings, and in most cases, many cases, it's possible to look inside of a fossil bone and use those lines and their spacing to determine whether the animal was still growing or done growing by the time that it died. As far as I am aware, most of the people who have done this kind of study on the Nanotyrannus skull have concluded that it was probably still growing. But that evidence, too, is just ambiguous enough that it is not a debate ender. To make a long story short, the question boils down to, was this baby T-Rex or grown-up something else? Which brings me back to my emotional support unsubstantiated hypothesis. I think the funniest answer to the Nanotyrannus question would be, it is a baby, but it's not T-Rex. I am rooting for us to find a grown-up Nanotyrannus that is so clearly something else, and in fact is larger than Tyrannosaurus, but we still have to call it Nanotyrannus because that's the name it had first.